Good evening and welcome on behalf of UK Romania Group to the second of our Romanian Heritage Season events. These are brought to you in partnership with the Romanian Culture Institute London. In our first event last week, we looked at the broad challenge of built heritage conservation and preservation in Romania. And next week is reflection on Romania's vanishing Jewish heritage. But tonight, our theme is exploitation, a study of threats to Romania's wild places and efforts to preserve and promote this natural heritage. To guide that discussion, we're delighted to have Charlie Ottley as our moderator. Many of you will know his fabulous documentary series, Wild Carpathia and Flavors of Romania. But to get Charlie here tonight, we had to interrupt work on his new documentary project. So if I can derail us for a moment, Charlie, I'm curious to know a little bit about this project. I think focusing on the Danube Delta. Maybe you can say a little bit about your production schedule, what you're trying to accomplish this film, and when we might get to see it.
Well, thanks, David, and good evening, everybody. Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Great. Many thanks. Yes, we have been filming the 6th in our Wild series. We did 5 Wild Carpathias, and then I wanted to do a special on the Danube Delta, because I feel this is one of the main jewels in the crown of Romanian tourism, and something that hasn't really been an area that hasn't been promoted at all properly in the past. It's the largest wetland in the whole of Europe, and it deserves to be seen as the Amazon of Europe, and I believe a place that people should visit from all over the world, and a vital environment, a vital biosphere reserve, and essential to preserve from the threats that it faces. For example, overdevelopment, pollution, litter, overfishing, unsustainable harvesting of resources. So we started filming at Christmas time, or shortly afterwards, and the idea was to catch the changing seasons. So we caught the snow and the blizzards, in fact got stuck, and we went down into the delta and through the ice, and saw the lives of the fishermen there. And we want to catch the beginning of spring right into the summer, and see how the landscape changes, the migratory birds arrive, cut with fabulous nature shots, interviews with the fishermen, the local cultures there, like the Lipovan and the Roman cultures, and get a real insight into life there, but also address key conservation issues.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. I think it's going to be, what, the end of the year?
We are very lucky to have Digi Network, who have already agreed to broadcast it on National Romania Day on Digi24, and then Digi Life and Digi World. And then I hope it'll be on TVR and Canal D and Antenna, and maybe even Pro TV after that. So fabulous. We shall see. Hopefully everyone will have a chance to see it.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, on that, thank you for that, Charlie. I'll hand over you to now to introduce the panelists and take us forward with our discussion tonight.
Great, thank you very much. So I'd like to welcome 3 panelists to our discussion this evening. We start with Catalina Radulescu, who is a lawyer working with Agent Green, a non-governmental and non-profit organization for environmental and forest protection established in 2009. The aim of Agent Green is to investigate environmental crimes, to expose them strategically, and to promote solutions for the conservation of biodiversity and ensuring the well-being of future generations. Next up, we have Gabrielle Galenoski, who is the head of communications at Bear Again Rehabilitation Centre for Orphan Bears, Europe's only centre for the rehabilitation of orphan bears. Founded in 2014 in Romania's Hazmash Mountains, most bear cubs that reach its care have been separated from their mothers by logging activities. Its goal is to mimic nature as accurately as possible and give its rescued orphans the best chance to develop and thrive when released back into the wild. Since beginning its work, Bear Again has saved over 150 bear cubs. Finally, I'd like to welcome Christoph Promberger, the co-founder and executive director of FCC, together with his wife, Barbara Promberger. The charity aims to create a world-class wilderness reserve in the southern Romanian Carpathians, large enough to support significant numbers of apex predators and to allow evolutionary processes to happen undisturbed by man. This new national park should be an icon for conservation and emblematic for Europe. as part of the work of Foundation Conservation Carpathia, is involved in creating a new sustainable green economy around the Făgăraș Mountains for the benefit of biodiversity, and local communities. So I'd like to start with Agent Green first, if I may. Catalina, welcome again. Could you tell us a little bit about the origins of Agent Green and how its work has evolved?
Agent Green started in 2009, and I started work with Agent Green in 2011, but I knew Gabriel. It is one of the founders of the association from his previous work, even before he established Agent Green. And I think they were something that actually the Romanian civil society was missing, because they're kind of working and the thorough investigation on field and in the forest was never done before. And I don't know any other organization working like that.
So basically, the first question I'd like to throw in then is this you're working as a very active on the streets organization? I mean, it's you have a huge social media following. Do you anticipate changing hearts and minds with the work that you're doing? What effect is it having, and is the progress being made?
On the conscience of the people, yes, I think that it's a great impact, because Agent Green made public many problems that were not available to say. For example, in what I'm working on the forest management plans until 2018, so until we started to work on this subject, all the forest management plans were sort of secret, not officially secrets, but anyway, they were not public. And we are still fighting to force the authorities to publish these forest management plans. We won in court several cases, but they still refuse to execute the decisions of the court.
A question to everybody. I understand it that, I mean, forestry law in this country is pretty good. It's not so much, it seems to me, the actual law itself. It's the policing of it and the enforcement of forestry law.
Can I answer that?
Please,
I think,
put it to the table.
This is something then the authorities would like to say, that the legislation is so good and we only have some implementation problems. Unfortunately, this is not true. And recently, the European Commission started several infringements involving also transposition of EU law, both on timber regulations and of the nature directives, involving the way the forest management plans are passed. For example, for the forest management plans, the evaluations procedure, so the appropriate assessment, the SCA assessment were not done. And in several occasions, we found the forest management plans that were applied even without approval from the minister. So this was a legal situation. This was established by law that they can do that. The law is not so good when it comes to respecting the environmental legislation. Maybe from the point of view of forestry, it's a good legislation, but it's not connected to the EU environmental legislation. And it is not Natura 2000 sites, for example. And
can I put that question to Christoph and Gabriel as well? Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think you know, we are in the year 2021. We are facing climate change, and I think what the Romanian law does not recognize so far is that times have changed. You know, we're still looking at these forests as if they would be just a source of timber, and not as something that we need in order to survive these times. You know, we are having water shortages. We're having rising temperatures. We're needing the forests to sequestrate carbon that is in the atmosphere. So this is something that the forest law doesn't foresee at all. So I think we need a major change in paradigm, how we look at forests in order to evaluate them in a way as they need to be evaluated.
So a consequence of deforestation is the destruction of the animal habitat, which is something that Bear again deals with through its work with orphan bear cubs. How do you, Gabrielle, to you, how do you rehabilitate a bear? And how do you know when and if it's safe to release them back into the wild?
Well, usually we get the cubs that are found and proven orphan from all over the country. And it takes a long time. It takes about 1.5 years for a bear to successfully be reintroduced into the wild. So the rehabilitation process goes in several stages. The first one being a stage when we get all the cubs from 1 year together and we make them socialize in a smaller enclosure. So they start behaving like siblings after a while. And then as they mature, the space that we offer them, the natural habitat, which is surrounded by electrical fences for their protection, keeps growing. And at the end of the rehabilitation process, we open the gate of the last enclosure and they step directly into the wild. But this happens in a natural way when they would normally leave their mother's side in the wild as well. So something changes in them and they feel a need to explore more.
So you don't find you get sort of the bears going back into areas of human habitation, they remain wild, is that right?
Yes, we did studies on the orphan bear cubs released here. Several generations of orphan bear cubs were monitored using GPS and radio telemetry systems. And none of the bears that were released caused any trouble. And this was also compared to wild caught bears. And those sometimes went close to communities and caused problems. And we think this happens because bear cubs take certain behaviors from the mother bears. So if the mother bear roams around a town, for example, then the cubs catch on that and they could potentially become problem bears as well. But at Bear again, we have minimum contact with the cubs, which is the main principle of our activity. We feed them from afar, and after the milking phase, we have no contact at all with them.
Okay. What is the current legislation around the disturbance of bears due to logging? I mean, for example, if a forester finds a bear den with cubs, are they required to cease activity in that area?
Yes, they should check before making the works there and stop until the denning phase is over, which is usually April, May.
Yeah, except they don't, as we've seen recently in that video, were shocking in the last few weeks. I don't know if you all saw it, but
yes,
it's not necessarily happening. Deforestation is one threat to bears, but another is obviously illegal hunting. These two issues go to a broader point of how a Romanian state protects the wilderness. This is where Conservation Carpathia is most active. FCC have a lot to do with this. So Christoph, could you summarize what you're trying to achieve in the Făgăraș Mountains and what the differences are between the FCC wilderness area and Romania's national parks?
Okay, yes, thank you, Charlie. I mean, I guess we're sort of an organization that is now a little bit over 10 years old. It started as an idea that was very, very ambitious, where everybody said, you know, we're a bit not really clear in our heads, because what we have been doing, Barbara and I, we have seen these amazing Făgăraș Mountains. That's an area of 200,000 hectares. So that's huge. You know, that's the biggest area probably in Central Europe that is still totally uninhabited. So within these 200,000 hectares, there is not a single village in there. There is rugged mountains, there's huge forests, there is virgin forests there is wolves, there is bears, there is lynx, there is red deer, chamois, wild deer, you just name it. So an area that we don't really find anymore in Europe. And so we thought, because we saw also the threats that were coming up with the restoration, with the restitution of the forests to the former owners, which in principle, you know, I totally agree with, that was the right democratic decision. But what happened was that a lot of these people, they got forests back where they had no relation to. They knew just that their ancestors had somewhere forests. And so what happened was that there was a big temptation to just cash in these forests in one way or the other. It's not everybody has been doing that, but enough people unfortunately have been doing it. And if you look today on Google Earth, you know, you see all the clear cuts that followed this restitution. But it's still, you know, there's still a lot of very, very beautiful intact forests. And so we thought, you know, in order to counteract these threats, there's also a huge opportunity at the moment, and that would be to declare this whole area into a national park. It could be the biggest forest national parks in Europe. It could be the most important national park in Europe. It could be an iconic national park similar to what Yellowstone is for North America or Serengeti for Africa. And it could be something that all the communities around could really benefit, because the situation that we have right now is that these communities are very poor. The youngsters are all leaving. The education system is bad. The healthcare system is very bad. There's no jobs. There's no income opportunities. And for these people, it's a real difficult situation. So no wonder that most of the youngsters are leaving. So having such a national park, you know, that could attract a lot of visitors. And we know many examples where national parks have really been the engine of rural development in such an area. We could brand the national park in the Fagarash Mountains for all these small-scale farmers to much better sell their products, because, you know, the products have a much better price if they come from such a natural area. And so it could be not only an instrument to protect the biodiversity that is there, it could not only be something for a Romanian pride, because, you know, if Romania has the best and the most iconic national park in all of Europe, on the whole continent, that would be a thing. But it could also, you know, be a very, very important economic instrument for rural development of all these 28 villages that are around the Fagarash Mountains. And this is what we're doing. I mean, it's of course a very, very complex project. It's not something that you do in 2 or 3 years. But I think we're well on the way, and you know, we're getting further ahead every year.
I want to ask you, what is the difference between the FCC Wilderness, though, and the Romanian National Park exactly? I mean, just to be clear on this issue.
Well, you know, I mean, we want to get the Fagarash Mountains to become a national park, but the existing national parks in most cases are just an area that is partially protected. Most of them don't fulfill the IUCN requirements of having 75% of the area fully protected. So there is still quite some logging going on in the national parks, and the national park administrations have not been given the tools in order to react to all the needs of these local communities. So the people in general, they're rather anti protected areas and anti-national parks, because they see them just as something that stops them from doing things, that stops them from developing, stops them from building, stops them from logging, and so on. But the parks have not been built in a way yet that they really bring a lot of positive economic advantages to the local communities. There are exceptions, and I don't want to say it's everywhere like this, but most of the parks, unfortunately, are not what they could be.
So, to address this to everybody, really, you know, with the logging issue, is commercial logging in national parks and wilderness reserves a big factor when it comes to sort of national deforestation? And should we try to get it banned altogether? Can I ask for a response from Catalina on that one?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. So commercial logging in national parks. How much of a factor is this when it comes to sort of nationwide deforestation, and should it be banned altogether?
Yes, commercial logging in national park, it's a problem. And it's mainly because several parks I mean, several parks administration is held by Romsilva, that is also responsible for the logging. It's a national company that main source of income is commercial logging, and they are also the administrator of the protected area, of the environmental protected area. So they are clearly in a conflict of interest between their commercial interests and the need to protect the forest, and the objective to protect the forest. That should be the objective of the administration of the park. So this is the main problem. And for example, in one park, since 2014, Romsilva failed to pass a management plan of the protected area because the commercial logging would be stopped.
Okay. Gabriel, do you have, Gabrielle, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, as we know, commercial logging is also a good source of income for many of the communities. For example, here close to there again, there's a small community which was a mining community, and the mines closed, and most of the income that comes in here is from logging activities. So that is something to be taken into consideration when making such decisions, so the local population gets an alternative to the cut of such income. But of course, from an environmental point of view, that would be an ideal case. But of course, this is a resource, and we need to figure out how to sustainably take advantage of this.
Do you feel that, given a lot of people in rural areas don't really have money to pay, for example, vast bills for electric heating systems, and therefore rely on wood-fired central heating, for example, and yet, whilst there are huge queues of lorries outside mills like Schweighofer and Kronospan and others, you find that in lots of areas, people find it actually quite difficult to get enough wood at a reasonable price to sustain them through the winter for their hot water and heating systems. Is there a way to address that, and how much of the deforestation that's happening is due to actually servicing these communities with firewood?
To my knowledge, in order to receive an FSC certificate, then this is one of the issues and one of the points that need to be checked. So the local population actually receives first access to their basic needs, to cover their basic needs, which is firewood, for example. Yes.
Yeah. Catalina?
I somehow do not think that the firewood, the need of the firewood is one of the main causes of deforestation.
No, I'm not suggesting it's a big cause, but I'm suggesting that if you extrapolate it out to all the communities in the country that have wood-fired central heating, collectively, it must represent at least a proportion of wood that's taken, especially when, in order to cut the price of wood, people are delivering illegally in vans. Now, okay, if it's like one community in a couple of vans, but if it's right across the country and people are doing it all the time, and I've witnessed this myself, it must eat away at the forest to some measure.
Oh, sorry. Yes, but there are forests inside the inside the national parks and other forests, so they can have firewoods from other forests and not from the forests that are protected and should be protected.
Okay, so it's not really a problem in your mind.
It is a problem because they are actually getting the wood from the national parks, and they shouldn't.
Exactly.
Because we have enough forest outside the national park. They don't need to buy wood from environmental protected areas.
Okay. In terms of trying to take steps to reduce illegal logging, how about heavier taxes on the export of raw timber, for instance, and investment in furniture making, grants and subsidies for redeveloping wood craftsmanship within the country? So we're not just exporting raw product, but actually increasing the value of it here in Romania. Christoph, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you know, it's with everything. If you sell the raw product, you get a little bit, and if you sell the processed products, you make you know, much more money out of that. So it's obviously the right thing to process the wood which we have here. But I want to come back to the question before. just briefly, because I mean, less than 2% of the Romanian surface is actually national parks. So that means that 98%, over 98% are not national parks. And I think this is what is to me the most important thing. We have in these 98% still huge amounts of land which are of a very, very high biodiversity value. We've got lots of virgin forests which are totally unprotected. We've got beautiful areas that are full of birds, of flowers, of whatever, that are totally unprotected. And I think if you're not careful, and this is where I think we have to be careful to focus too much just on the national parks, because the national parks, even if we get all of the national parks, 75% of them protected, and then the buffer zone handled in a very, very sustainable way as it should be, I think that's way too little. We have to get way beyond that. I mean, on the one side, we have now the decision of the European Parliament that 10% of all the land of each country, of each member state, should be totally protected. So we have to face that. We have at the moment we have 0.7% of Romania totally protected.
Wow.
So we have to get a lot more. So we have to just totally rethink the way we deal with the land here. I mean, yes, the local communities, still about 50% of the Romanians live in rural areas, which is a very, very high percentage, and the big majority of them heat with firewood. But they've been doing that so for the last 100 years. So it's not something that's totally changing. So I mean, when we design a new system of forestry, of using forests, and a new system of protected areas. And of course, we have to take these local communities into account, and they're the key to everything. But we have to really think about, do we want to sell our timber, or do we want to sell the carbon? Do we want to sell the oxygen? Do we want to sell the water that is being collected there? And do we want to sell the beauty of it, and have people coming and enjoying that? Because by the end of the day, I think that that Romania can make much more money with these alternative uses of timber. Plus, it's a necessity. We have climate change, and we have to react to that, and it's going to hit all the villages around. It hits the towns around. It hits Bucharest if there is a shortage of water, and we're still in a situation where we can really tackle that, and we should really do that.
Can we move to the biodiversity in a greater sense, not just the forest, because we're seeing a lot of reduction in biodiversity through intensive agricultural practices in the surrounding areas around the Carpathian Mountains. As it's spreading, foreign companies are coming in, buying land from local people and fencing off large tracts of land, and that somehow sometimes prohibits access routes, traditional access routes, or corrals animals to intensively graze in one area, which means they then need to use fertilizers to get the grass to regrow, which obviously is very bad for certain sensitive species. So this fencing issue must also have a huge effect on apex predators. And I'd like to ask Gabriel whether he's noticed this as an increasing problem and a threat to bear populations, the proliferation of fences, which seems to be happening more and more in this country, and whether this will have a profound change on the landscape.
Yes, well, of course, one of the greatest risks is habitat fragmentation due to roads, for example, or private properties that are fenced. And we have mainly orphan bear cubs that come from forest exploitation disturbance, but there are also quite many cases of car accidents, for example, or train accidents. And in recent years, we've also had some cases of bears being separated from their mother by dogs from the sheepfold, for example, which I think these are increasing in number in to my knowledge. So yeah, this fencing is a problem. And for example, bears have been using for centuries the same spaces, habitats as humans did, but now everything is changing. We have sheepfolds that are constantly in one area, when in in the past, bears could use that during the night when the sheep would move out of there, but now they are in one area.
I mean, I've seen in Toplica, I've seen in, and heard descriptions of in the Hertobatu Valley and various other parts of Romania, where there are actually fences going through forests, and actually cutting off any kind of roaming or migratory routes of these apex predators, not just bears but wolves as well, for instance.
Yes,
should we do something? Yeah, please, sorry, carry on.
During the communist times, for example, the whole forest was managed at a national level, and after that, they were given back in many places to local communities to handle and exploit. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see forests which are cut off from the picture.
How do you? I'd like to ask this to Catalina. Is there a way to regulate this kind of spread of intensive agriculture and the threat that poses to the biodiversity?
I think that the Ministry of Agriculture developed some projects in this regard, and they established a list of 20 species of birds that are endangered by agriculture, and they also established some measures to protect them.
But there are, there are a lot of laws that apply to Natura 2000 sites, for example, which are just not being enforced.
I'm sorry, can you?
There are a lot of laws that that apply to Natura 2000 sites, as I'm sure Christoph knows very well, that are blatantly not being enforced in many areas.
Yes, there are many laws, but this project of Ministry of Agriculture is applied everywhere in agriculture, not only in Natura 2000 sites.
Okay,
so they established some measures, but I'm not aware of the implementation, how much these measures are respected.
Absolutely, I think that's part of the problem. Christoph, I'd like to address that to you.
Yeah, we are not only active in the mountains, we also have this big biodiversity farm in the Transylvanian hills. This is an area, and I think when we talk about agriculture in Romania, we have to distinguish quite well between different areas. So the Transylvanian hills, this is where these problems occur right now that you're talking about. I mean, there is the big agricultural areas in the south of the country, which is everything flat, which there's no trees, there's no nothing. I mean, they're having other problems. They're dealing mainly with problems of a lack of precipitation. But in the Transylvanian hills, it's a different story, because there we still have an incredible biodiversity. I mean, it's well known that Prince Charles is very much in love with that area. He visits it, I think, every year for a week because it's so rich in flowers, in birds, these oak pastures that are unique for Europe. So it's an absolutely amazing place, and it's not very productive in terms of agriculture. The soils are a lot of clay. It's rather dry, arid area, so it's not prime area for agriculture, but it is definitely a prime area for biodiversity. So I think this would be a fantastic area to show how biodiversity farming could function, and go over big areas, go over hundreds of thousands of hectares there. And then, and this is again, what the government, the regional governments and the local governments should implement. There is already some really good examples how tourism has actually, and a very, very low level tourism, but a very high quality tourism has saved some of these villages. And people nowadays, live 70–80% of their income actually comes from tourism. So, but this tourism again is there because of this ancient traditional agriculture. So there should be a focus in these areas, not to produce as much as possible, but to produce products that can be used also for tourism. And the product is not just beef or a tomato or an apple. This product is also flower meadows. This product is these ancient oak trees with stag beetles and whatever it is. So I think here we need, again, a change of paradigm so that the agriculture in this area reconnects to its roots. There is still a lot happening. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to strengthen the current agriculture and avoid that this goes into again, mass production with thousands of cattle on the meadows, or then intensive agriculture or whatever it is, just what you have just mentioned. And I think it's, again, it's from all sides. It's from the economy, it's from the biodiversity, it's for the rural life. It's just, it has only advantages. But we have to stop these few people that are heavily investing into that, and that have other interests, and the big majority of the people there.
Thank you. So I'd like to go back to bears for a second. Are there more bears or less bears than there were 10 years ago? I mean, how many bears do we have in Romania, Gabriel? And maybe I think you might have, all of you have a different answer to that, because lots of people come up with different answers, including the hunting clubs, who I believe are or have been responsible for the census of a bear numbers. Are we facing a boom in bear populations now, or do you think it's actually declining?
We don't know. That
Right.
is the real answer. We do not know. The last count that was done 6 years ago, and it was done using old methods. Mostly the gathering the data was done by counting the tracks. What we need to know is the bear is a very complex and smart animal. It goes through several stages of exploration, the winter sleep, and in spring it goes down, in autumn it goes at higher altitudes, and it can have up to 600,000 hectares of home range. So if you're counting the tracks, for example, then you might have one individual that walks through maybe 20 hunting rounds, and if you count it like that, you're not going to get the right number. So the only solution would be a proper genetical study, which takes a long time and a lot of money, and with specialized personnel. This idea that there are too many bears, it might be actually a concentration of bears, because this is what they do. The bear's an opportunist. So if you have an area with an abundance of food at one certain time of the year, then you will have a sleuth of bears there, maybe 20, 30 individuals, but the surrounding areas have no bears. So there's a dynamic going on, and we do not know how many bears Romania has. From what I've heard, the numbers go between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals, but there's no scientific data to prove
So
this.
it's fair to say that it would be a bit premature of the government to put forward proposals for culling bear numbers until we accurately know how many bears there are in Romania.
And there's also no direct link between the number of bears and the damages tax that they do. Like in some countries, the bear population goes up, but the damages that they do go down. It all depends on how you manage the certain population that you have after you have the information of the dynamic of that population and the number and the state in which the habitat is. Because you also need healthy habitats which are undisturbed, for example, to have a healthy population of bears. And the disturbance keeps going up and up through tourism, which is uncontrolled, through chaotic deforestation, and also agriculture.
So is illegal hunting or deforestation the biggest threat to bear numbers? Which is would you say more of a threat?
The biggest threat is the public's opinion of the species. There are countries which even one bear is too much. So if people can understand that this animal, this emblematic species for Romania, could actually provide for all their needs, tourism, for example, to understand the value that it brings to their local community, to their forests, then they might start protecting it. If you have a faulty compensation system when you're receiving damages, for example, of your wild, of your livestock, of course, the species is going to go down. And also the media has a big responsibility with this to properly promote the message and the situation in the country. So the biggest threat is how people perceive the species.
Okay. Christoph, I know you've done a fair amount of monitoring of apex predators, bears, wolves, lynx. Have you got anything to add to that?
Yes, I mean, we are, as a conservation organization, we're the only organization outside the hunting clubs that has rented or leased hunting concessions. So we have 4 hunting concessions with a total of 65,000 hectares, where we have stopped all trophy hunting and all sport hunting, and we focus only on conflict management. But we have developed a monitoring program together with 3 neighboring hunting concessions with regular hunters clubs. And what we do is we go basically for the most secure way of monitoring, that is the DNA fingerprint. So we collect hairs, feces, urine in winter of the bears and the wolves as well. We monitor lynx with camera traps because every lynx has a very specific pattern on the fur, so you can identify every single individual lynx. And what we have found is we started to, we had the first hunting concession in, we took it in 2011, and the last 2 in 2019. So we have now for quite a while all these hunting concessions. And this has been especially during this time where, the public outcry after they were protected in 2016 was that the bears are multiplying, and there's so many now, and they're coming all over us. And if the hunters don't save us by shooting the bears, we're gonna get eaten up all by the bears. And we have actually found that if you take the reports of the hunters from the earlier years and then our monitoring with genetic information, which is I mean, there's nothing to discuss about them, and genetics are genetics. We found that actually the bear numbers have not gone up at all, so that the number of bears are pretty much the same. We've even found slightly less than the hunters claimed before that they were. There's no development of a population since 2016 that would have any upward direction. But what we have seen is that the behavior of the bears is changing dramatically, and this is mainly due to climate change, because still 10
they're
years ago,
they're not hibernating anymore so much, are they?
Exactly. So still 10 years ago, in sort of late November, early December, you wouldn't see any more bear tracks in the forest. If it got cold, bears would disappear. They would hibernate, and then they would come out again, sort of mid-March, end of March. And now there's bear tracks all over the mountains throughout the whole winter. So there's a big number of bears that are not going hibernating anymore. And then, of course, obviously in December, in January, in February, in March, they don't find food. So there's unless there is a very big beech nut crop from the autumn, it's not that they find a lot of food. So they have to go and find that somewhere. And that gets them in contact or in conflict with local communities. That gets in conflict with the farmers. And this is where the problems arise. So it was possibly a coincidence, but it was also that until 2016, the hunters have been intensively feeding wildlife and thus, keep them away from the villages. And then from 2016 onwards, once bears first were protected, they didn't feed them anymore. So the bears were suddenly, where they had food, they didn't find that anymore. So they were roaming around in other places. And this is now a situation that is very, very tricky. I mean, we have the same situation. What are we going to do? Do we put food out somewhere in order to keep the bears away from the villages? But that means at the same time that those bears that would naturally starve over winter don't starve. So they reproduce. And
so you're increasing the number by doing so.
You either increase, or at least you're keeping the numbers high, not unnatural. And if you don't feed them, the bears are coming into the villages. So it's a very, very tricky situation right now. And there is not just one thing that is the right thing, one thing that is the wrong thing. But I think, you know, what the government does at the moment, promoting sort of a quota for bears, that the bears would be, you know, would be sort of shot just to keep numbers down. This is a totally wrong approach because it doesn't resolve the problems.
So let me, because we need to put some questions to our listeners. I'd just like to ask one final question. It's obvious from what you're all saying that you know, as we encroach on the habitat of these apex predators, as we cut into national forests, and as more forests are logged and more urban development sprawls, we're bringing these animals into closer and closer proximity to humans, and we're reducing their habitat. So it's obvious that problems will happen. But given that you had a situation in Borșa where nearly €1 billion of wood was stolen over a 10-year period, and not one single person got prosecuted, went to jail, or was fined, and everyone from the local magistrates to the police chiefs to all the local people knew exactly what was happening, and thousands of trucks rolled 24 hours a day through those roads. How do we actually protect Romania's forests? I mean, what can we do to stop this? And this is a question that obviously I would like to address first and foremost to Catalina.
In terms of criminal investigations, I think that the Romanian policemen and prosecutors are totally unprepared for any kind of environmental crimes. It's something that is highly unknown.
So an education, to educate them. We need to
education, yes. Education is very important. Environmental law is still not an object of study at the university. It's only half, I think, a semester class, and it's optional, and most of the students do not take it.
Yeah, and eco studies is in fact
the prosecutors without any idea about any kind of environmental legislation, including environmental crimes.
Okay, Christoph, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the problem is quite obvious. I mean, we have a strong link between this timber mafia and several of the political parties. This is all well known. So, I mean, there's a lot of protection there from the political side. And, you know, at the same time, there is then obviously not a lot of will to break this chain. So I think in respect to police and prosecutors, one of the problem is that, you know, they're doing everything, and they are being evaluated according to the percentage of cases that they resolve. So if they have a murder and they resolve it, and then they have a wood thief and they don't resolve it, they still have 50-50.
Wow.
So if they have in total, you know, whatever 60-70% of the cases that they resolve, they're considered okay. And generally, you know, sort of these environmental crimes are not considered high enough importance to be treated in a way that there is enough interest there. So I think, you know, this idea that was discussed a year ago here with sort of an environmental anti-police and an environmental anti-corruption agency, or even a forest anti-corruption
police
would be a great thing. Because simply because they still have to then, you know, prove that they resolve 60 or 70% of the cases. So simply they have to go in this direction and in this field and resolve some of them. They can't just say, well, this side, you know, we don't deal with that, and we do all the murder and the child mistreatment,
whatever,
whatever it is. You know, so I think that could be something that would really solve a lot of issues, because they would be just there and would resolve 60 or 70 or 80% of the cases.
And they wouldn't be, hopefully, from the community that they're investigating, and thus be a little bit more objective. Yeah. Gabrielle, I'd just like to ask that to you before we turn to the audience. Have you got anything to add on that note?
No, I think that's clear.
I think we have, yeah, exactly, covered it. Well, look, thank you guys so much for participating, and thank you, David, for organising this. And let me hand it back to you, if I may, for questions from the audience.
Sure, thank you, Charlie. So I think just to pick up on that last point, you've talked about some of the challenges of law enforcement within Romania, but of course, much of the logging is carried out by firms from other EU countries. So I'm wondering about the role of the EU as an organization, or what efforts you're making to pressurize other member states to try to regulate or control some of the firms that are based in their own countries. What's the role for the European Union in trying to get involved in protecting Romania's forests, or the things that other member states might do?
As I understand it, they're not doing very much. When I spoke to the president of Biodiversity in Brussels, who came over, his response was that actually no one has submitted sufficient evidence for them to be able to take direct steps to intervene. And obviously I question this because, as Christoph mentioned to me at the time, you only have to look at it from space to see, quite how bad the damage is. But I think a concerted effort needs to be made to engage, Brussels and to try to have more international intervention in this, because Romania is the custodian of the last great mixed forest in the whole of Europe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I think you all do great work, but I'm wondering about how you work together and with each other. Do you think, what kind of interfaces do you have individually as groups? And clearly with Agent Green protecting the forests and the work that FCC is doing. And I know that Bear Again recently has been cooperating with FCC with one of its current orphans. So can you tell me a little bit about how you work together and how some of those collaborations came about?
Yeah, if I may start with that. I mean, of course, the amount of organizations that work in that field in Romania is not very big. So automatically we all know each other. And the good thing is that we have very different roles. We have sort of Agent Green as an organization that is very much in the advocacy direction. There is the Bear, or the guys that look after the bears and do that. So for us, this was fantastic because we had it's now I think 3 weeks ago we found this this little baby bear that was at the edge of an area where there had been major windfalls. It was not in our property, but it was generally in our hunting concession, and they started to clear all this timber. So the mother obviously ran away from the noise of the chainsaws, and this little bear cub was here. We wouldn't have known what to do with it, honestly speaking, because we don't have the capacity. So we, it was great that we had our friends over there, and we could give him this bear cub, and we hope he's gonna grow and he's gonna be released at some point in time back into the wild. So it's great. We're having all very different roles. So there is no competition at all, but it's also, I mean, it's not necessary that we do everything together because of these different roles. But I think overall, we need actually a lot more Agent Greens. We need a lot more wildlife protection organizations. We need a lot more people that work directly on new protected areas. So Romania is, I should say, a developing country when it comes to organizations that work in the field of environment, unfortunately.
Another question then. I see that a lot of you are trying to encourage sustainable tourism, but I suppose one of the problems that comes with that, and you've seen it a little bit in the case of Biskri, the village that Prince Charles is very much a fan of, that has become such a tourist hotspot in its own right, that is creating some negative consequences for that village. And I can sort of imagine a situation in which you put together all these terrific projects to protect bears or to protect the wild spaces, and yet that in turn attracts such a magnitude of tourists that perhaps you're going to create some downside from that. So I'm wondering about what sustainability and sustainable tourism looks like in that broader sense.
Well, I'm happy to chip in with an answer to that, if I may. We've seen this a lot, and I think part of the problem is that only certain areas get promoted. So yes, if you funnel all the tourists and promote one area like Biskri, you're going to get a huge deluge of tourists. If you don't put bins up in national parks, provide for waste management, which is not really happening in Romania, then you get a huge litter problem, which is obviously very negative impact on the environment as well as on tourism. We need to educate people here in Romania about the importance of sustainable tourism and how to contribute to that, not go, oh, there's lots of tourists coming, I'm going to start a quad bike rental business, of which there have probably been about 6 cropping up around Bran in the last 8 or 9 months, which do terrible, terrible damage to the forest. And nobody respects the public rights of way. They go off-road as much as possible. And this is a terrible problem. I mean, if it was me, I'd have them all banned. You need a license to use one and only for work. But, you know, there are issues. And I think we need to really brand Romania in terms of green tourism and send tourists to different areas, not just to the same places, and to regulate the numbers a little bit. And you can do that by exacting a charge for parking at national parks, making sure that people know there are lots of different places they can go and see, and promoting those internationally, which is what we've been trying to do.
Excellent, yes. And another point, there was an election in Romania recently in a new government, and I understand that Agent Green's founder, Gabriel, is now an advisor to the government. Catalina, do you think that's an indication that the government is ready to act? What do you think the role of Agent Green can now be as it's interfacing with government?
It's still not clear to me if the government is willing to do more for environmental protection, but it's definitely a government that seems to be open to collaborate with civil society. And unfortunately, in the last 30 years, I think that we had only 1 or 2 governments really willing to work with the civil society on various issues. So this is very important. And I think it's a very good thing that Gabriel Paun is honorific. It's not an official advisor, but it is appointed as an advisor to the Prime Minister. And if the Prime Minister is willing to listen to what he has to say, then I think it's a good thing. And I really hope that the government will have all his intentions towards proper collaboration with civil society. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same thing about the Minister of Environment that promised, I think 2 months ago, that we will be included in some working groups on passing new legislation, and I still heard nothing from them. So
sure. But so I suppose that leads to a natural closing question for me, and maybe this is something we can go around and each of you can respond to. You've got an audience, some in Romania, some in the UK, I'm sure people joining from elsewhere in the world. So what would your one ask be for this audience? How would you like us to get involved? What is it that we can do to support your organizations or your principles? What's your one wish for us tonight? Let's start perhaps with Gabrielle.
My one wish would be to ask all of the viewers to be respectful towards nature, never feed a bear, and if you have a little extra support causes, not just for bears, but environmental causes, social causes, just get involved.
I think you know the most important thing is to encourage all the Romanian people, whether it's the Prime Minister or whether it's a peasant out there, to encourage them to understand that they have something which is very, very unique for Europe, that they have sort of the crown jewels of Europe, and that they should use it in a proper way, not by destroying it, not by exploiting it, but by protecting it, because that's, by the end of the day, the one that will get Romania the biggest advantages in all directions, both economically, socially, and environmentally.
Splendid. Catalina, any thoughts?
I think I still think that one of the main problems in Romania is education. I think that the Romanians in general need raising awareness activities on importance of environment and what exactly needs to be protected, but also officials and people in the government, because sometimes they are annoyed by evaluation procedures or by the need to approve more expensive projects just to avoid destroying some bugs. And this is exactly how they are talking. Some bugs, they're just some bugs, I don't care about them. Let's just not spend so much more money just to protect some very small creature. So I think that education and raising awareness are very important for Romanians, are still very important, because actually the government is not doing anything in this regard. And I think it's up to us to promote such issues.
And that, of course, raising awareness is very much what Charlie is doing through his films. So if you haven't seen the Wild Carpathia series, if you haven't seen Flavors of Romania, I do encourage you to watch those. And of course, look out for his Danube Delta documentary when it appears later this year. So on that note, let me thank all of our panelists, Christoph and the Foundation Conservation Carpathia, Gabrielle there again, Catalina and Agent Green, and of course to our moderator, Charlie Ottley. Next week, we have the third and final in our Romanian heritage season, and that is under the title of Erasure. It's going to look at Romania's vanishing Jewish heritage. So I hope to see many of you here again next week, next Wednesday at 5 p.m. UK time, 7 p.m. Romanian time. Thank you again, and thank you, of course, to our co-hosts, the Romanian Cultural Institute in London. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys.